right, guys, so we are moving on to our second day of flashcards here. So we are going to start off with the cells unit, and this is going to be your yellow note cards. And I'm looking at the board here, and it says you should have 2 yellow note cards. So there's going to be about the same amount of slides on cells and cells transport as there was in biochemistry. So you can divide that up how you want. Also today we're going to move on to the second or the third unit, which is photosynthesis and cellular respiration, and you also have 2 note cards for that unit. And that looks like that's going to be on your 2 orange cards. So we're yellow and orange today. We're starting with yellow for cells and cell transport. Okay. All right, so the first thing that we talked about with cells was just that all living things are made out of cells. So whether we're looking at a plant, a mushroom, a human, us, and all those living things are made out of cells. We also said, looking in the top right corner here, that all cells have cell membranes, so the surrounding of the cell. They have cell membrane, they have DNA, they have ribosomes, and they have cytoplasm, the gooey stuff that fills them up. That's what all cells have. Okay, we also talked about the difference between prokaryotes and eukaryotes. So prokaryotes over here, they are very simple, small cells. They don't have a lot of stuff in them. So no fancy schmancy organelles in them, and especially not a nucleus. That is the most important thing you need to know about prokaryotes. No nucleus. And here's a picture here. It is, I can't tell on my screen. It looks like it might be hard for you guys to see this, but it's just a small, simple cell. And an example would be a bacteria cell. Okay, over here we have eukaryotes. They are larger, more complex. They have a bunch of different organelles in them. They do have a nucleus, and an example of this would be a plant cell or an animal cell. So our cells, for example, are eukaryotic cell. So on your note card, you need to come up with a way to maybe set up a table to show the differences between prokaryotes and eukaryotes. When it comes to the differences between different types of cells, we also need to know the differences between plant cells and animal cells, both of which are eukaryotes, which means they do have a nucleus. They are big and complex. They have a nucleus and DNA. Okay, so plant cells over here, they do have a nucleus. They have a cell wall on the outside, which is around the outside of the cell membrane. Helps the plants stand up. They also have a very large central vacuole that stores a lot of the water and nutrients for the cell. Also, plant cells have chloroplasts, which is essential for the life of a plant because this is where the photosynthesis happens. This helps them. This is where they make their food. Over here, we have the animal cells. They also have a nucleus because they are eukaryotes. They do not have a cell wall, which means they're not as square, rectangular shaped as that plant cell over there. They're more irregular. Okay? They also have small vacuoles, so they don't have that huge, big vacuole to store a lot of water. They just have a smaller vacuoles. They can still store stuff in them, but it's not anywhere near as big as what's in the plant cell. And they do not have chloroplasts. Okay, so our cells do not do photosynthesis. We are not green plants. We can't do that. I'm sorry. Okay, next we have cell membrane. So this is one of the parts that we need to focus on when we're reviewing for the state test. We don't need to get so focused on all of the little parts of the cell. We need to know overall that in eukaryotic cells, there are a lot of different parts that are all working together for the cell to function. But on the state test, you do not need to focus so much on what does the Golgi apparatus do? What does the endoplasm but we do need to know what the cell membrane does. So that is one that Ohio feels like you need to know what this is. Okay, so cell membrane surrounds every single cell. Prokaryotes, eukaryotes, they have this. Okay, the cell membrane is for protection, and it's made out of 2 layers of phospholipids, and that's why we call it the phospholipid bilayer. Makes sense. Okay, we also need to remember that those phospholipids, they're doing this because the head part of the phospholipid is hydrophilic. That means it likes water. It turns towards the fluid, the water stuff. The tails are said to be hydrophobic. They have a phobia of water, and that is why they turn to face the inside of the cell membrane. They're hiding in fear. They're scaredy cats. Okay, also in the cell membrane, you will see in this image here that there are different proteins embedded in the cell membrane. Those serve as transport channels, places of attachment for different molecules, like tags to identify the cell, like blood cells. So we can identify those as A, B, or if they don't have tags, they will be type O blood. Okay. Cell membrane controls what goes in and what leaves a cell. So while we were talking about this, we defined diffusion, and we said that's when molecules go from an area of high to low concentration. So it was always high to low, high to low. When molecules did this across a cell membrane, we said that is passive transport, and that does not use any energy. This just happens on its own. Stuff can just fit through those phospholipids. If the stuff does not fit through the phospholipids, remember that can still happen, but there needs to be that helper protein embedded in the membrane for the stuff to get through. And we call that facilitated diffusion. So it can still be passive transport, but that's just when the stuff is too big. So like a really big glucose molecule, it would have to go through a special protein, and that's facilitated diffusion. It does not use energy. Okay, osmosis is a very specific type of passive transport. So osmosis does not use energy. So this is just the diffusion of water through the cell membrane. And remember, water always wants to go from an area of high concentration of water to an area of low concentration of water. And we talked about 3 different situations when it comes to osmosis. We talked about hypotonic solutions, which is where there is a lower amount of solute in the solution, which means there is a very high amount of water in the solution. And so in the hypotonic solution, there's 4 arrows pointing in here and only 2 pointing out. So water will continue to flow in both ways, but the overall net movement is that water will move into the cell, causing it to swell up. All right, next we have the hypertonic solution. So again, water moves both ways, but overall the water is flowing out because in a hypertonic solution, there's more stuff in the solution and the water's rushing out to try to balance that out. So the cell here is shriveling up like a raisin. And the third option here is isotonic solution. This is where the particles that are dissolved in the cell and outside of the cell and the solution are actually balanced. So the water is going to evenly flow in both directions, and the cell is the ideal preferred shape here. It looks normal. So this is passive transport. It does not use energy for water to move. Okay, but we also have active transport, and that is when we want to move stuff across a membrane from an area of low concentration to high concentration. So we're going against the concentration gradient, which means we do have to use energy. So it says here in big bold letters, this does use energy. And then again down here, when we have to use a protein, so like over here, that molecule is going through that protein. If that's ever happening, it's going to be facilitated diffusion. So we have to have a helper protein. So active transport does use energy. And this is just one example that the ODE Ohio suggested that you guys know specifically about the sodium potassium pump. So this is used to keep really high amounts of sodium outside of our cells. So it says over here, the sodium potassium pump uses energy to keep high concentrations of sodium outside the cell and high amounts of potassium inside of the cell. So we are always actively using energy to keep really high concentrations of these molecules on either side of the membrane so that we can use them for what we need to use them for. Okay, so that's active transport. And the other example of active transport that we need to remember is the difference between exocytosis and endocytosis. So exocytosis is when stuff leaves the cell, it's exiting, and then endocytosis is when a cell takes stuff in. Okay, so that is that on cells and cell transport. Okay, so now we are going to move on over to photosynthesis and cellular respiration. I feel like the video just got clear. So this is going to be your orange card, and we're using 2 of these. So get ready for that. Pause the video if you need to. All right, so first thing we're going to start off with is photosynthesis. So on your orange card, we are going to start off by writing down just the definition of photosynthesis. So plants and protists and some types of bacteria use the sun to convert carbon dioxide and water into sugar, glucose, and they also release oxygen, which is a great thing because we get to breathe that in. How awesome. Thank you, plants. And this happens in the chloroplast. Okay, so this right here is a diagram of a chloroplast. We have inside the little green pancakes that are thylakoids that are all stacked up. Remember, the thylakoids are where the light dependent reaction happens, and then the stroma, which is the gooey stuff around inside of the chloroplast, that is where the Calvin cycle happens, or you could call that the light independent reaction. Okay, so this is a summary of that. So the light dependent reaction over here in the thylakoids, water and light go in, oxygen is released over here, okay? And then the Calvin cycle, which is over here, is where carbon dioxide goes in, and then finally glucose comes out. Okay, so on your note card, if you want to sketch all this out, awesome. If you just want to use words to summarize it, you can do that as well. But I would probably pause the video because this is quite a bit of information, and get that on your note card in a way that will help you the most. Okay, photosynthesis is affected by different factors. So light, the amount of light that's there, the amount of carbon dioxide that is there, and also the temperature is going to have a big effect on how quickly photosynthesis can happen. And remember, we talked about how you can measure the rate of photosynthesis by measuring the amount of oxygen that is getting released, which makes sense because the more oxygen that's coming out of a plant, the faster photosynthesis is going to be happening. Cellular respiration, this is the last step here. So cellular respiration is the opposite of photosynthesis. We are using glucose to make energy now, ATP specifically. Okay, so we have glucose and oxygen, and we're using that to make carbon dioxide, which we exhale, and then we're also making some water, and then about 38 molecules of ATP. And over here I put a point. Remember that animal and plant cells both do cellular respiration. Okay, so don't fall into the trap of thinking plants do photosynthesis, animals do cellular respiration. That is wrong. Animals I almost said photosynthesis. Animals do cellular respiration, but plants also do cellular respiration, and they also get the joy of doing photosynthesis as well. Okay, cellular respiration occurs in the mitochondria. Okay, remember the parts of the mitochondria. We have the outer membrane, the inner membrane, which is all folded into the cristae, and the inside is called the matrix. In the picture of the animal cell, The mitochondria are the little bean-shaped organelles. This picture here just summarizes the steps of cellular respiration. So we have glycolysis is the first step. It happens in the cytoplasm of the cell and it makes 2 molecules of ATP. Then we go into the Krebs cycle. So glucose is out here, it gets broken down into the pyruvic acid, and then that goes into the Krebs cycle, and that gets rearranged, and then that makes 2 molecules of ATP. And then we move into the electron transport chain, which is where the electrons are moving down the electron transport chain, and that is making most of the ATP. So about 32 molecules of ATP right there. Okay, I believe this is the very last thing. Yeah, this is the last slide here. So hopefully you are fitting this onto your orange cards nicely. So just the effects, or what affects cellular respiration. So there has to be glucose there. So glucose is the starting point there. So if glucose is not available, cellular respiration cannot happen at all. Okay, also cellular respiration has to have oxygen to happen. That's one of the reactants. So if that is not there, cellular respiration it's not going to happen as efficiently. It can still happen, but it won't be able to start and go into the Krebs cycle. And when this happens, it goes into anaerobic respiration. And we talked about 2 different types of anaerobic respiration. We talked about the alcoholic fermentation and then the lactic acid fermentation. So the 2 byproducts of that are going to be alcohol for the alcoholic fermentation and then the lactate for the lactic acid fermentation process. And that is what causes your muscles to hurt really bad. Okay. And that should be it. So if you have any questions, please ask. If you needed extra note cards, please ask. I can find some for you, but hopefully you were able to get that to all fit nicely. All right.